on this episode of Indiana Education Insight.
Early childhood educators have grown to understand is of those 5 constructs, phonological awareness is the number one precursor to reading success for students.
Every week, the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents is taking you inside today's Indiana education collaboration and tomorrow's education trends. We're staying on the pulse of public school innovators throughout Indiana and beyond. Join our conversation and contribute to our upcoming topics at iapssin.org/podcast. Here's your host, Dr. J.T. Coopman.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Indiana Education Insight. I'm Dr. J.T. Coopman, Executive Director of the IPSS. This podcast is being delivered by our IPSS team and produced by our friends at Edge Media Studios. As Executive Director of IPSS, I'm excited to bring you this weekly show where we feature Indiana education innovators from all over our great state, from students to superintendents. We'll also be talking to higher education leaders and educators at the state level as we work together as proactive public education advocates. That's why IPSS is here and why we're proud to bring you this show. Every week, we're talking about trending topics in the public education space while bringing in Indiana education innovators to hear their perspective. As with any organization, it takes great leadership to be successful, and that is one of the main missions of IPSS, developing great school district leaders. It is always great to have experienced and passionate educators joining the show. So let's get started with today's conversation.
Topics and trends in Indiana education.
Today's guest is Dr. Lynne Kulich, Senior Account Executive for NWEA, as well as numerous public speaking engagements. She's been instrumental in shaping the conversation about Indiana public schools and has the ability to look at education from various lenses, which is very important. Of course, she's been a tremendous asset to public education in Indiana. Let's find out how she views the issues in Indiana public schools. I'd like to welcome Dr. Kulich. Thank you for being on our show today. We're excited to have you with us and look forward to hearing your comments. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and NWEA?
Thank you so much. We certainly at NWEA appreciate our partnership with IAPSS, so I was so excited and thrilled that you invited me to come today to speak with you. So a little bit about my background. I actually live in Ohio and have spent the majority of my educational career there.
Okay.
Graduated in 1992 from The Ohio State University and actually had a French teaching certificate. So I started teaching French. A year later, I landed a job with the Georgia Department of Education. It really was transformative. So I worked to create and model FLES curriculum for the state of Georgia. And FLES stands for Foreign Language in the Elementary Schools.
Okay.
So it was there that I grew to really discover my love for elementary education.
Okay.
So moved back to Ohio, earned a master's degree in elementary education. And while I was teaching in elementary school, I decided to work on my doctorate degree in curriculum instruction, early childhood literacy. So left my school district to my chagrin because really my happy place is first grade. And I taught in multiple universities teaching undergraduate and graduate courses in early childhood literacy. But discovered that I missed being with the kids. So I went back and earned a administrative licensure as well as superintendence. And I was a director of curriculum in 2 school districts in Ohio that still currently partner with NWEA.
Okay.
I really, in those 2 school districts, enjoyed great success working with NWEA, growing our students, using the assessments and the data. And lo and behold, I ended up in this role. So actually this September, I've been very fortunate to transition into a new role as an account executive in the early learning solution area. So I'm an early learning specialist. So while I support schools in Indiana, I also get to support schools all throughout the country and work internally to help support our teams as they work side by side with educators throughout the country.
Okay. Maybe there might be some members of our audience that don't know a lot about NWEA. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So NWEA, I'm just so blessed and thrilled to work for such a great company.
Sure.
While I miss teaching first grade, I don't have any regrets leaving that role and coming to work for such a great, diverse company. So we actually were founded in the 1970s. Okay. By educators in the northwest portion of the country. Our home office is actually Portland, Oregon. Uh-huh. And these teachers, very similar to teachers today, really grew weary of the end of the year summative assessments. So, sure. In our education world, we often refer to those as, autopsies. So those assessments that, they assess how well students achieve throughout a year, but the data often arrives after students have long, gone through the doors and are enjoying summer vacation. And there's nothing teachers can do in real time to help change the trajectory of their students' achievement. Sure. So they created NWEA to really not only measure achievement, but certainly growth and to project growth. So we are a not-for-profit, research-based company. Okay. Partnering, and we really love and enjoy our partnership with well over the majority of schools in Indiana. And I do have to say that, gosh, if my memory serves me well, I think our new CEO took office last December, so about a year ago. Mm-hmm. And one of the most profound things that he said initially, and every day I hang my hat on that when I get up and begin my day. He said, we will not measure our success at NWEA by the number of students we serve, but instead by the amount of growth that those students are able to achieve. Okay. And that really speaks true to our mission, sure. Our mantra. Mm-hmm. We're all about growing students and supporting teachers.
Great. Well, I know that NWEA is very robust in the state of Indiana. And, of course, the whole conversation about assessments is an ongoing conversation here in our state about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And so maybe one of these days Indiana will get it right. So how important is early reading instruction and assessment in response to the needs of the field? And what opportunities do you see now for transforming educational opportunities for all students?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So essentially, early literacy is paramount in the success of a child. Sure. I know in 2017, the National Center of Educational Statistics reported that 10 to 15% of all students will inevitably drop out. And of the 10 to 15% of students countrywide, who drop out report reading difficulties. So we know that early literacy is that key that unlocks all opportunities for all students, certainly throughout Indiana. Yeah. And in the early 2000s, the National Reading Panel really came up with and promoted what has become to known as the Big Five constructs of early literacy development. Okay. And those include phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. And essentially, those five constructs are what needs to be the focus of early literacy instruction and also of assessment. And what early childhood educators have grown to understand is of those five constructs, phonological awareness is the number one precursor to reading success for students. So essentially, students who come to kindergarten with a sense of the sounds that letters make and grow to be able to segment words into their sounds and manipulate those sounds really demonstrate the likelihood that they'll achieve reading success or proficiency. So it's very paramount. And also what research has told us is children who live in high poverty come to school with the disadvantages of lacking oftentimes that robust vocabulary or those robust background experiences. I like to often talk about this virtual vocabulary backpack. And I think that all children entering kindergarten have this virtual backpack on.
Yep.
And students living in high poverty often tend to have a lighter backpack. So when they lack a robust vocabulary or experiences, it makes learning and literacy more challenging because they have less vocabulary or background experiences to draw upon. So I really think in looking at what we can do in education is certainly, number one, invest our time, our resources, our energy, our funding in early childhood literacy, and understanding that we need to be proactive instead of reactive.
Sure.
The other important message, I think, is the focus on engagement. We have to be able to engage and entice and promote and sort of plant that seed for literacy at a very young age. So I'm really a proponent of universal quality pre-K programs to level that playing field for students. You know, educators say all the time, a child's zip code should not determine whether or not they're going to be successful in school and in life.
Yep.
So education has to be that great equalizer. And if we can provide quality pre-K programs that really start to plant those early literacy seeds at a young age, we can ensure that, you know, we're going to decrease that 10 to 15% of the student population who's likely to drop out.
So Indiana's probably one of 4 states that does not have pre-K programs on a robust basis. We have pockets where we have pre-K investments, but certainly not on a universal basis. So our kids are probably going to end up being a little bit behind when they start first grade. And I can recall my first grade experience was with Dick and Jane. So how does that play into the whole thing as far as what reading looks like today?
Right, absolutely. So I think, you know, there certainly are some similarities. I had mentioned earlier about phonological awareness being the precursor. So I think, you know, I started kindergarten in 1975, and I remember those readers, and I remember such a focus on phonics. And while phonics is important, and we need systematic, consistent phonics instruction, we also need to immerse children in, you know, real texts. So there needs to be this synergy between the two. And I think that at an early age, the more we can engage children, especially in expository text, that makes a world of difference. Because if we know that a particular child loves soccer or loves animals or loves food and cooking, if we can engage them with expository texts that focus on that particular topic, we're more likely to hook them and help plant that seed that reading and literacy is actually pleasurable. And it's enjoyable, and it's also a way to increase your knowledge. So I think engagement really is key. And also, you know, certainly promoting best literacy practices in the home for parents. You know, I have 3 children, and I don't know if that's to, you know, their advantage or disadvantage being I'm an educator, but I certainly knew things I should be doing at home. Not every parent is an educator or an early childhood educator. And so I think that we need to do a better job of helping support parents and guardians and really equipping them with simple strategies that they can implement at home and best practices to help promote those early literacy skills before children arrive in kindergarten.
This is going off a little bit off of our script here, but how well are teachers prepared in early literacy and reading skill development in our college preparation programs, if you know? Yeah,
that's a really great question. I would say over the decade, it has really transformed, especially because of the 3rd grade reading requirements that most states have in place. So when you look at early childhood education at the collegiate level, teachers with certifications, whether it's pre-K through 3, have to undergo specific literacy instructional courses. So, for example, in Ohio, I had to have a reading endorsement. And there's often, different paths and options teachers have in order to get that endorsement, whether they take courses, whether they demonstrate their knowledge by taking an assessment. There's a variety of pathways, so to speak. But early childhood educators have to have instruction in the teaching of phonics, typically, in order to be certified as an early childhood educator.
Yeah. Makes sense to me.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the core, that's the foundation of everything
Right.
that we do in school is the ability to read. So that certainly makes a lot of sense to me.
Right.
So what is the future of assessments, and how can NWEA best partner with Indiana schools?
Yeah, so a great question. Happy to talk about that. So, as I mentioned, NWEA loves, and really our mantra is walking alongside teachers to support students and their growth. And so our assessments change on a yearly basis. We implement upgrades, we create new products based on our teachers' input. So we're very cognizant of the changes that take place in policy and in practice, and we want to make sure that we're best suited to support teachers. So we really appreciate our teachers' feedback, in Indiana. So our assessment, the MAP Growth Assessment, which is our flagship, it not only provides achievement data, but it provides growth data.
Right.
Data on how well students are growing towards meeting particular standards. But what makes it so unique is that it's adaptive. Because if there's one thing that an educator knows, it's that regardless of a student's grade level or their age, all children develop on their own timeline. So, I think there's an old statement, not everyone learns to tie their shoe on the same day. Not everyone learns to read. So even if you are a first grade child in Indiana and a first grade teacher is tasked with addressing the standards in first grade, not all students are ready for that.
Right.
So the MAP Growth Assessment really swoops in, identifies where a student's at, what skill sets they're able to demonstrate, and highlights their zone of proximal development. Each of the items or questions within our MAP Growth Assessment, and we really enjoy the largest number of items out of any assessment vendor on the market, they are aligned to Dr. Webb's depth of knowledge, a level 1, 2, or 3, 3 being the most rigorous. So essentially, we're not just asking children multiple choice questions. We are asking them to create graphs or flowcharts, tables and charts. So we're really moving in the direction of performance-based assessments. So that is definitely on our, it's on our roadmap, it's our vision. We understand the importance of it. It's important to be able to identify what a child knows, but educators recognize that it's most important to be able to identify how well they're able to apply what they know in a real-life, real-world experience. So I really think the future of assessments is in that performance-based realm. And that's something, as I said, we're cognizant of that. So while we're happy and thrilled to be able to provide growth assessments that are adaptive and meet children where they're at, regardless of their grade level, we are moving in the direction of being able to support teachers with performance-based.
It seems to me that some of that is also highlighting some higher learning skills.
Absolutely, definitely. And that's really where we're fortunate to be aligned to Webb's depth of knowledge so that we can demonstrate that each of our questions are aligned to a particular level of rigor.
Great. Now, again, I know a little bit about NWEA, but you've introduced a couple of new terms to me as far as proximity or proximal.
Zone of proximal development.
Yeah, so that's all new to me. I kind of get that. I understand that. There are features to NWEA that I particularly like as far as the formative assessments are concerned, and the ability that NWEA has provided instructional strategies for teachers to go back and use based on individual skill development of the students, and use those instructional strategies to move that learning forward. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what you might be hinting at is really the data we provide and how it's linked to what we call our learning continuum. So with the MAP Growth, our flagship assessment, teachers see what we call RIT scores, and it stands for Rosh Unit. And that RIT score signifies a skill set, so to speak, for a student. And we also have RIT ranges so that for particular goal areas. So when we look at reading, we're going to provide teachers not with an overall reading score for a student, but a range of abilities that the student is ready to work in as far as vocabulary or literacy or expository text.
Sure.
So that RIT score is really important because what it does is it links to our learning continuum.
Right.
NWEA is so unique in a variety of reasons, but one being that when we say we partner with educators, especially in Indiana, we truly mean that. So every time, and I know I'm going to get a laugh out of you for this one, but every time Indiana sort of reinvents its state summative assessment, NWEA goes back to the drawing board. And in order for us to measure achievement and to predict and measure growth and also project students' proficiency scores on the Indiana summative, we have to go back and do linking studies so that we can give some, real accurate projections with valid and reliable data.
Yeah.
So we are very blessed to have a very large, robust department of researchers and content area specialists. Without those departments, it makes it virtually impossible for us to continue to align to each state's standards and link to each state's summative. I think in Indiana, teachers don't want to give a MAP growth assessment that's aligned to standards in Oklahoma. That's not what they're teaching.
Right. Yep.
So we're blessed with the ability to align specifically to Indiana.
Sure. Well, all of that makes a lot of sense to me. Only your vocabulary and explanations are much better than mine would be, so I appreciate that.
Sure.
What are the third grade reading requirements, and how does NWEA kind of track and help with those things?
Right. So Indiana, like the majority of states throughout the country, have passed some legislation that really is attempting to ensure student literacy by the end of third grade. So as I mentioned, I'm from Ohio, and we certainly have what we call the third grade reading guarantee in Ohio. Sure. So essentially, the Indiana Department of Education has stipulated to a certain extent what early childhood literacy needs to look like in the classroom. So they are recommending at least 90 minutes a day of literacy instruction in each classroom to include those big 5 constructs that I mentioned previously. Also, all third graders in Indiana need to be able to achieve that reading proficient cut score on the state summative assessment.
Right.
And essentially, it's very high stakes because if a student does not achieve that reading cut score, they are a candidate for retention, and they would not be promoted to 4th grade. Inevitably, it comes down to a school corporation and parent decision. I think what's interesting is that a child can be promoted in other subjects to 4th grade, but essentially be retained for reading.
Okay.
There is also a caveat that states that a child who is retained can be promoted mid-year if and only if they are able to demonstrate not only third grade reading proficiency scores, those cut scores, but also demonstrate that they are able to meet grade level expectations for the beginning of 4th grade.
Okay.
So, in looking at third grade reading guarantees, and I'm going to kind of put on my personal hat that I'm not going to speak on behalf of NWEA, but for me personally as an educator, I'd like to see maybe a first grade reading guarantee. And what I mean by that is early childhood educators fully understand, as I mentioned, that phonological awareness is paramount.
Right.
If we look at state standards throughout the country, you will not find phonics or phonological awareness standards in third grade. The idea is that those constructs should be nipped in the bud in grades K1 and to a certain extent 2nd grade. So by the time a child reaches 3rd grade and they're struggling with reading, typically it it presents itself in fluency scores and comprehension ability. Oftentimes, educators understand that the culprit is probably phonological awareness and or phonics. And, ironically, when I travel throughout Indiana working with educators or anywhere in the country and we have these conversations, I see heads nodding because they understand that. Yes, the child may have trouble comprehending, but the root cause typically lies within the decoding realm, which is phonological awareness and phonics. And so if we do not intervene and be proactive early on and nip those phonological awareness skills in the bud, we're essentially promoting a child on, and then they're likely to struggle, as we see it in third grade, because they're having difficulty comprehending. So I really think it's important that schools use assessments, such as the MAP growth assessment, to be able to identify if a child has difficulties in those early foundational reading skills. It's too late by the time they're in third grade.
Makes sense to me.
Yep.
And we have a new requirement in the state of Indiana that relates to dyslexia.
Yes.
And so is there any interplay between what we see with dyslexia and what we see with these other reading skills?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm glad you brought that up. And had you not, I would have. So the Department of Education has approved the MAP Growth K2 Skills Checklist to be used as a dyslexia screener. So what exactly are these K2 skills checklists? So they're actually embedded assessments. They're very short. So those of you out there who are listening who use the MAP growth assessment, you certainly understand on average it's about 45 minutes in length. Right. The skills checklists are much shorter, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and they can be used as often as on a weekly basis. Okay. They provide item analysis on those early foundational skills such as phonological awareness and phonics. So if a child is performing below grade level based on certainly the MAP growth data, and a teacher's anecdotal notes, other assessments, and that child qualifies for a Tier 2 or Tier 3 intervention program on a weekly basis or, every other week, a teacher might use those K2 skills checklists as progress monitoring to determine if the intervention, say on phonics or phonological awareness, is in fact moving that needle and in fact closing those gaps for that student. So if you have the MAP growth assessment, specifically MAP growth for K2, you have those K2 skills checklists embedded. They're already there, and you have access to those. And so those are have been identified as a dyslexia screener by the Department of Education, which is wonderful because it's important to be able to use an assessment for multiple purposes. And the MAP growth assessment definitely is an assessment that can be used to really tackle a whole variety of objectives.
Which is a great segue into how can educators use NWEA's Learning Suite as part of their professional toolbox?
Right. So the MAP growth assessment is really a K-12 assessment, reading as well as math. We certainly also have a science component, and embedded within MAP growth math, our high school math assessment. So we're really a robust product meeting a variety of needs. Our early learning suite, I'm really excited to talk about it. Not only with MAP growth does the assessment measure those college and career ready anchor standards. So specifically for reading, so key ideas and details, craft and structure, text complexity, literary analysis. It's also norm referenced, provides achievement and growth scores and projections for state summative proficiency. We are so excited to have launched just this year after 2 years of piloting. We have our MAP Reading Fluency Assessment. Okay. So the MAP Reading Fluency Assessment is the only assessment on the market that provides a fluency assessment that is really housed within this philosophy of how true reading should be taught and assessed.
Okay.
So I remember in the early 2000s as a first grade teacher, we used to have to dibble our students.
I remember that.
Yeah, and we also used the developmental reading assessment.
Sure.
I had 4 other first grade colleagues, and our school district hired substitutes to pull us out of the classroom so that we could one by one assess. I could assess all 27 of my first grade students. It would take a week just to assess my class. And then my colleagues and I used to joke, what if we took one student and all 5 of us assessed that student with dibbles or the DRA? We knew for certain we would get 5 different scores because those assessments are very subjective, right? So the MAP reading fluency assessment is unique because in about 20 minutes, we can provide an early foundational skills assessment with fluency. Students wear a headset with an embedded microphone, and the assessment automatically assesses, scores, and records students' oral reading. It also will assess other early foundational skills, all in about 20 minutes. So a first grade teacher, for example, can take her students to, say, the school computer lab, and in approximately 20 minutes, have all of the early foundational skills identified for that student. The recordings are saved and archived indefinitely, and a teacher can play those back. I remember back in the day when we used tape recorders in the classroom.
Sure.
I'll never forget a little girl I had in class. She was a foster child. So I knew her background, and I knew that she was moving from home to home, et cetera. And based on dibbles and DRA, she did not initially qualify for Title I services. However, I knew she was struggling and would fall further behind if she did not get some intervention.
Right.
So I popped in a cassette tape into my old-fashioned tape recorder, pressed play and record, and I tape recorded her doing, essentially a running record, reading aloud. I played that recording for my principal and our Title I instructor, and lo and behold, they were able to recognize, you're right. I think we do need to provide her some tiered, intervention. Now, a teacher using MAP reading fluency can press play and hear the child's oral reading and follow along. They can do a miscue analysis if need be. They can play back that recording for parents, for students, for any stakeholder to really kind of monitor and follow along with the student's progress.
That's unbelievable.
It's a phenomenal assessment, and students love it. It's very engaging. And, like I said, the other thing that makes it really unique is, unfortunately, with some assessments, we have somehow promoted this message to children that all that matters is speed. It's their fluency. It's how fast you're able to read. And that's not the goal of reading. Comprehension is the goal. So when we send the message to children that you just need to read a text as fast as you possibly can, regardless of whether or not they can comprehend, we're not really assessing, the true skill of reading. So the MAP reading fluency assessment also will adapt. So if I am a first grade teacher, I'll never forget a little boy who is now, I think, graduated from college. He lives on my street, Colton. So I'm going to give a shout out to Colton Bonk in Canton, Ohio. He came into first grade I think by the end of the year he was reading Harry Potter. So those first grade reading anthologies weren't doing much to really grow him as a reader because he was performing above grade level.
Yeah.
If I had, and I did, use the dibbles and the DRA assessment on him, I was often assessing him with grade level text. The MAP reading fluency assessment will adapt.
Right.
So had I had that assessment back then, when Colton logged in to take the MAP reading fluency assessment, it would have adapted and he would have been asked to read texts that were at a much higher lexile level than those pretty much recognized as first grade level texts.
Yeah, right.
So essentially, it's giving teachers the most accurate instructional level for the student. And we're highlighting the student's zone of proximal development within phonics and phonological awareness. So we're not only going to tell a second grade teacher that she has students who have gaps in phonological awareness, but we're going to really kind of hone in on the student's zone of proximal development. We're going to tell that teacher, this second grader actually needs to work on decoding CVC pattern words. So that, for all of those reasons, it really makes the assessment unique. And we're just so thrilled and proud to be able to offer it to teachers.
That absolutely sounds fabulous to me. I can't imagine a school district not wanting this for their students and the teachers not wanting it for their students and development. So
Right.
So what resources are available from NWEA to build awareness and build bridges for educators?
So there are lots of resources. I think, predominantly we're known for the MAP growth assessment.
Right.
As I mentioned, we have a variety of assessments, not only math, science, reading, high school math assessments. We also recognize the English language, the English learner, and the important piece that they play in a classroom, and the need for teachers to be able to grow them as well, like any other student. And we have a Spanish reading screener, and we are actually piloting. So any listener out there who might be interested, we are still would love to pilot with schools. We have the MAP reading fluency in Spanish, and we also have a MAP growth Spanish assessment that we are piloting. In addition, beyond our assessments, we have an NWEA community. It's a virtual community online. So everyone who partners with us has access to this site. And within this site, it just provides a plethora of resources. So we have blogs from actual educators, here in Indiana, who are sharing their successes, their challenges, and how they're using the MAP growth data to help support their students. We have case studies, and I want to give another shout out. There are so many wonderful school districts with whom we partner in Indiana. One of them is Rensselaer. Curtis Craig is the superintendent of Rensselaer, and last school year they were piloting MAP growth with us, and they invited me to come multiple times to meet with their team, their cohort, who were piloting the assessment. And I worked with them in looking at their data. And I will never forget Curtis Craig sharing with me some data. He said, Lynn, never before have our teachers seen such tightly aligned data and linkage between what scores students earned on the MAP growth assessment and those scores they earned on the Indiana Summative Assessment. He said, never before. And so we've sort of really developed this great professional relationship, and he constantly would reach out to me every time they finished their assessment window and share with me some of their success stories. So they actually agreed to partner with us on a case study story.
Okay.
So that's also in that community that school districts have access to. We also understand that data are just voices. They don't have legs. That's where teachers, the educators, the administrators come into play. So we really pride ourselves on the professional learning that we offer.
Okay.
We understand that we're going to provide the most valid and reliable data on the market. However, if teachers don't understand and aren't able to analyze the data and use it to their benefit and their students, then it's pointless.
Sure.
So we offer online, virtual, and on-site professional learning workshops to help teachers analyze their data and actually apply it. Some of our workshops just aren't focused on the data, say that teachers garner for MAP reading fluency or the MAP growth assessment, but we also offer data coaching services.
Okay.
So if a district wants us to kind of swoop in and look at multiple sources of data and create plans for a school district on how best to move them forward, we are well equipped to do that. So really, because we have a robust professional learning department, we're able to do that. And, I just can't speak, enough or say enough good things about our tech support, our professional learning, our implementation. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention our account managers. So actually in Indiana, we have multiple account managers One of those managers happens to be Laura Riley, and she was always my direct kind of cohort, my colleague.
Right.
And NWEA really hires a lot of educators. So Laura Riley was a former principal, I think, here in the Indianapolis area, and she's been with us for well over a decade, and she knows MAP assessment data inside and out. And I really want to encourage schools who partner with us to rely on their account managers. They are there to support them, to help them analyze data, to come visit, to engage in, virtual conferences, conversations. They are really their support link to NWEA. So
That's terrific. So how can teachers and administrators use NWEA to inform them of best instructional practices? That's one of my favorite parts of NWEA.
Right, absolutely. So I've touched upon this a little bit already when I talk about all of our professional learning sessions. So want to mention two additional things. First off, we have something, we're very proud of the valid, reliable data and reports.
Right. Yep.
We absolutely, I know our partners in Indiana are just thrilled with one of our newer reports that we launched a couple years ago, our student profile report. And we're constantly upgrading that to meet teachers' needs. I know teachers absolutely love our we call it our achievement and growth quadrant chart. And our educators, even in Indiana, have said, hey, we love this. Could you please put this on the student profile report? Absolutely. That's what we're here to do. We have a College Explorer tool that is an excellent tool resource for students, parents. I know guidance counselors here in Indiana love it as well. And we heard educators here loud and clear. They said, put it on that student profile report. So we did, so that when teachers are conferencing with parents, they can click right on that without leaving the student profile report. The other piece, I think, is, not only professional learning, our premium reports. We're very fortunate to be able to offer what we call these sort of portfolios, so to speak. So I know when I was an administrator in Ohio, one of my tasks as the director of curriculum was to report to our Board of Education on how our students were performing on the MAP growth assessment, how well they were growing.
Right.
Boy, had I had access to the premium reports back then, I would not have had to have done all this, digging and creating on my own.
Right.
While educators can certainly export any of our data and reports for their own means, we will work alongside with them to create reports meeting specifically, their very specific needs. So if educators want to see how well their students are growing throughout their corporation and how their growth compares to, say, 4 other school districts who are very similar, we can certainly do that. So we have a whole team set and ready to go to kind of come in and help prepare a portfolio, and those are called premium insight reports. The other thing I wanted to mention that I didn't earlier is, every year we offer what we call a fusion conference. And this is a conference we're very proud of because not only can educators attend to hear from us internally at NWEA,
Right.
but we value our partnership with educators, and those educators submit proposals to present so that other educators throughout the country can come and learn from their successes.
Right.
So I believe this summer it's in St. Louis, and that will be a fusion conference that teachers in Indiana can certainly attend, and I highly recommend it. I will never forget my first year in a school district as a director of curriculum near the Cleveland, Ohio area. We were using the MAP assessment, but really not with fidelity. So I really wanted to get my teachers on board. Yep. And I sent 8 middle school teachers to our fusion conference in Chicago. So, if you're in Ohio, what teacher doesn't want to take a road trip to Chicago in the summer? So I sent 8 of them there with the goal of immersing yourself in NWEA and the MAP assessments and come back and present what you've learned to your colleagues. And I can, I remember like it was yesterday, sitting in my office and all 8 of them at my door just so excited when they came back because they had learned so much. They were now on board. It was a win-win. They were going to share what they learned with their colleagues. So I really encourage educators to take the opportunity to attend Fusion conferences.
I think Indianapolis has hosted that a few times in the
you
past.
Absolutely have. I think actually maybe 2 years in a row.
2 years in a row.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because, we, as I mentioned, we partner with well over the majority of schools. So it just made sense for us to, have the conference here, and we had multiple educators from Indiana presenting in those conferences.
It is a fabulous conference.
Yeah.
And educators appreciate and learn a great deal at the Fusion Conference. So I absolutely agree with you on that.
Great. Thanks.
So in closing, what advice would you have for Indiana school leaders as they move forward?
First off, I think I really just want to commend the educators in Indiana because I have worked for 3 years now closely with educators, teachers, Title I instructors, aides, principals, you name it, throughout Indiana. You're just very blessed with such a great group of professional educators who get up every morning, so well-intentioned, to grow their students. And, I've always said when I left the classroom, and became an administrator, I wasn't working any harder or any less. I was just working on different things.
Different things, sure.
Those teachers get up and they're working not only in the building, they're working at night and on weekends and holidays and over the summer, and, really with the goal of growing every child like their own.
Right.
So because so much time and energy is spent, I really think it's important. One of the best suggestions I can offer is that each district really conduct an assessment audit. That was one of the things I was tasked with doing in my new position as a director of curriculum. The superintendent in my district said, I believe we're using a plethora of assessments as well as online instructional resources. We're paying, we're using taxpayer dollars, not necessarily with fidelity, because we're implementing all of these assessments. Mm-hmm. I don't think teachers fully understand the data. They're not using it to drive instruction. Please really, create a cohort, do an assessment audit. And at that time, our school district was using the MAP assessment, the MAP growth assessment. However, no one was accessing the data, the reports. We weren't having conversations. We weren't using it to grow our students. Yep. And so what we were able to do with the assessment audit is really whittle away all of these outlying assessments that weren't meeting multiple purposes. Sure. So I think the charge is to look at the assessments you're using. Are those assessments able to meet multiple objectives? Mm-hmm. With the MAP growth assessment, as I mentioned, it provides achievement and growth data and state proficiency projections. Mm-hmm. It also can be used as a program placement data piece. It's also, a universal screener. It can be used as a dyslexia screener. It can be used for gifted identification. And once the school district I was hired into recognized that there was no need to give this smorgasbord of assessments and we could focus on using MAP growth to meet all of our needs, we were saving taxpayer dollars and we actually were saving instructional time in the classroom.
Absolutely.
So I think that's one of the most important suggestions is if you have not invested in an assessment audit, it really is to your benefit to do so.
I agree with you. And I also appreciate you giving a shout out to teachers. Teachers are too often maligned in today's public, and they work very, very hard for the benefit of the children that they serve, and they deserve all the kudos that we can provide to them. So thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. Yep, you're welcome.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Kulich for being our guest on the IPSS's edition of Indiana Education Insight. Time now to wrap up this episode with my take on the current state of affairs in the Indiana education landscape.
Dr. JT's closing comments.
Although you've pointed out that assessment is still important, but there are many factors that go into preparing all students to become lifelong learners and contributors in the 21st century. As such, we need to begin to change the dialogue. As we enter the next session of the Indiana General Assembly, we need to focus on education issues such as testing that does not enhance learning but is used in how we evaluate schools and teachers. Do we really need a snapshot in time as a metric for evaluating public schools and teachers and students? As such, do we really need to change the dialogue? Due to the complex issues associated with school reform, we need to engage our communities and have them help us develop the portrait of a graduate. As such, the process, as it is important, the final product is what we're really looking for. And as such, we need to change the dialogue. We have so many educational issues requiring our attention, such as early childhood education, appropriate assessments, the teacher shortage, teacher pay, professional development, school security resources for privatizing, and things like privatizing charter schools and vouchers for private schools. And communities and parents need to engage and see how they can change this dialogue. Through this public dialogue, it is my hope that we can get our legislators and our state leaders to see the value of public schools and the nexus of promoting public schools as economic developments in Hoosier communities. I see these as investments in our children and in our state, not as an expenditure. Perhaps we can pursue this issue and others in another segment. On our next show, January 14th, we welcome Mr. Tim Tobin, President and CEO of Performance Services. Perhaps he can provide some additional insight into the State House and into education. Join us for that and more on the next Insight into Indiana Education. Thanks for being a partner in education, and please stand up for Indiana Public Schools.